Marge and I have been working on Annette's cabin at Depot Bay, trying to finish up. We completely remodeled it, and then Marge has a toothache, so we're going to take it to Mexico and get it fixed. We go past our neighbor's little pickup and see it's taken a bad hit. I'll bet he's sure upset about that. We take the short drive down to the harbor at Depot Bay and then go on. Over the Cascades, we find that it's a time of year the daffodils are blooming really pretty. Then we get near the summit of the Cascades and find a reasonable amount of roadside snow, and all the snow-capped peaks are capped with a pretty new coat of snow. Over the Cascades and down into the Oregon desert. It's been a little bit wet there, but there's no snow on at this time. As we move through the desert, we get almost to Annette's desert property, and we see a beauty of a sunset. It looks like sort of a sundog, and then that big moon comes out and lights the place up almost like it's daylight that very night. The next morning, we roll out of bed to have nice sunshine, and the snow-capped peaks on all directions are shining with a bright new coat of snow. We get ready to go, 'cause we have to go clear to Mexico to get Marge's tooth fixed. She's been undergoing some cancer treatment, and some of the medication we found out was causing her teeth to get loose. It's about 1,100 miles from the trailer house to where we'll get her tooth fixed in Mexico, but it's well worth it considering what they charge in this country, and we were very satisfied with the work. We consider their work down there very top class. We head down our little 2-track road. It's had a little mud in it, but looks pretty good now as we move on out toward the main highway. A little group of antelope stand at attention on the hill and watch us go by, and the wild horses are paying very little attention to us as they're grazing around out in the flat bottom land where it looks like the feed is pretty good. These are horses of all color, but we have a mission to go on. We have to get going. So we go past Hawthorne's big army depot, supposedly the largest army depot in the world. After traveling most of the night with just stopping at a restaurant for a while and sleeping, we find ourselves at Brawley, California. That's next to the Mexico border, and we see that it's super wet there. We have a favorite spot where we camp down by Five Palms Hot Springs, so we try to go down the little gravel road to it, and there's water puddle after water puddle, and this road is a little bit soft. And we finally figure out that the spot where we would set our tent up would be covered in water about like this. So we just turn around and go back and find us another spot to spend the night. That's just a little bit too wet there, but the weather forecast is looking good, like it's going to clear up. Every place was soaking wet here, so we do something that we very rarely do. We went to a motel to spend the night, but only one night. The next morning it's cleared off pretty good, and we go past the big feed lot near Brawley, California. They claim they have 25,000 head of cattle that they're fattening up here for market. That should make a lot of hamburger. The poor cows, though, out running around in that mud, but they seem to have adapted to it pretty well, and they're doing okay. As we move on up north, the water puddles are just every place around here. I guess they're not used to getting that much rain, but wow, look at the wildflowers. That's worth the rain to have such pretty wild flowers gracing the otherwise bleak desert floor. The desert floor is totally alive with blossoms, from big to little, and bushes with many, many heads of flowers on them, to some that just have singles on them. What a sight, and we hit it just about right. One of the desert's most hardy residents, the creosote bush, is blooming. The octella is not blooming yet, but soon will be. It's a super bloom this year, and everything is putting out its individual colors. This beaver tail cactus has the prettiest little blossoms on the end of the fronds. The cholla also have to wait a little while before they bloom. We come to the Five Palms Hot Springs, and we're going to go down and check it out. We see there's still a lingering puddle of water in front of it, but there's many more than Five Palms. And this hot spring was at one time a well. When General Patton was training troops here, he drilled a well to get water for the tank crew, and it's still running, although the well casing has rusted out, but still hot water pours out. And a group of bees have made their home in an old tire here, but they're good bees. They don't seem to bother us. And we found a dry enough spot to put our tent up, so we'll put it up here and then walk a little ways down to the hot springs. Marge's tooth finally worked out, and that was the end of her toothache. It was one of these teeth that goes in an implant, and the implant that goes in her jaw had fallen out too, and we don't know where it went. So she'll have to get that fixed, but when we went to Mexico, they said they couldn't do a thing for her while she's taking that medication that caused it to come out. Around the sandy area around the hot springs, every place you look, you'll see wildflowers. We're up early the next morning, and we're down at the border getting ready to go to Mexico to get Marge's tooth looked at. We get the tooth looked out, and they say there's nothing they can do till she stops taking that medication that she's taken for her cancer. So we get I am afraid of my chair. When you move your mouth to speak, I feel the blood rush to my feet. Now it took time for me to know what you try so not to show. Something in my soul just cries. I see them wanting to do. After an excellent meal in Mexico, then we head back to our campsite. We find there's nothing to be done about her tooth until she stops taking that medication. The next morning we're up early, and I want to go see Slab City. That's one of the places where a lot of the homeless people from Los Angeles have gone out here, and they're They've set up their camps in an old military base that's no longer used. This was one of their guard shacks to the base. And anyway, all you need to do is just go in there and set up a makeshift camp and do some artwork, and you're home free. There's a place here that they call Salvation Mountain. It was built by an old guy with old tires, bales of hay, lots of concrete, and people donated lots and lots of paint for him to paint, hundreds of gallons of paint. And it's all with a religious theme. There's even old hippie buses and trucks and everything you'd see. So everything here is about love and salvation and religion on this particular portion of it. Some old tires make a great huge cup for garbage, and another old hippie truck with a neat little camper build on the back. The recent flood of rains has done some damage to this place. Normally you can go take a tour through it and go in it and climb to the top of it. But since it's rained, it has to be repaired before you can do that again. And there are people there that are going to repair it. The only thing they said, it'll just take some time. There's all sorts of painted waterfalls and little windows you can peek out when you go through it. When this was a military base, they drilled a well to have water for the base, but they came up with hot water. So they capped it off in the first scene. You see the cap, and then the casing rusted out, and it filled a pond behind, which is used for the hot springs. And what a neat place. After the hot springs, we go take a little tour around. It's on Jesus Street, and this is supposed to be a museum. Although we didn't stop and walk through it, we'll save that for another time. But we did see lots of people walking through it, and it's just a conglomeration of junk and stuff that they've gathered up here. At one time, the state was going to sell this place, but they couldn't get anyone to bid on it because they said it would cost more to clean it up than it's worth. You go through all sorts of emotions going there, from amazement to disgust at some of the garbage. So we'll go back to Five Palms where we're camped and look at some of the beauties of the wildflowers and go for a little hike. The first thing we found were a bunch of pieces of pottery and some beauties of flowers in bloom on the dunes. This pottery was from ancient Indians that lived here, and some of the locals say that they put a pot over someone's head when they died, and then it later becomes broke into small pieces. And I'm not sure I buy that theory. It's one theory probably out of many, but I don't really know why those pieces of pottery were out there. But whatever, the little insects still like to run around amongst the wild flowers. If the theory is correct that these pieces of pottery were from a bowl put over the head of the deceased when they're buried in the sand, they need to be regarded and taken with some respect and should not be moved from the spot where they are. There's even some animal dens here. I think this was probably made by the kit fox, and all sorts of little creepy color tracks where they've been running all over. That looks like the kangaroo rat's track. and lizards and sidewinder snakes, although I think it's been too cool for the sidewinders to be out yet. But these desert lilies are just really, really nice. These lilies were probably our favorite sand dune flower as they gently wave in a gentle desert breeze. There are just lots and lots of them growing out here uh, to grace the otherwise bleak desert. On the dune, amongst the many, many flowers, we find lots more of these pieces of pottery, and it would be very interesting to find out just exactly how they got there. There's a few different theories, and I'm not sure which one I want to buy. But anyway, they're really pretty, and I'll bet you they're real old. We found some junk here from a happy birthday bloom. On the horizon, we can see the palm trees around Five Palms Hot Springs. So we're just about to end our hike, and it would be nice to end the hike with a dip in the hot springs as we see a few more wild flowers spread out all over the sandy area around the hot springs. But we have to start packing up and heading out of here real soon. It's some very pretty flowers and a totally wonderful evening, but we have to be heading on up north, heading to heading toward home. The next morning we're up as the sun barely comes up over the valley, and we'll be loading up and heading north. We've got quite a long ways to go before we reach home. Around Needles, California, they're very proud of the old Route 66, which used to go through here for those people who wanted to go see sunny Southern California. And then the thing we dread most, going through Las Vegas. But hey, it was darn good today. There was very little traffic due to the closure of the casinos. I guess people decided not to sin today, so there was very few people going through Sin City, and it was a whiz getting through there. We can look over at Las Vegas Strip as we move northward. Then past one last brothel as we move north. It looks as though it might be closed. I imagine it's hard to maintain your social distancing around a brothel. But oh, Walmart's open, and it's time for another Walmart vacation. So I'll just sit in the car while this goes on and try to sleep or do something to occupy myself. After the Walmart vacation, we move on up to our little trailer house setting in the shadow of the Steens Mountains out in the middle of the desert. And it's so good to get here where the only sound you hear at night are coyotes howling. While the Steens Mountains are a very small mountain range, they're one of the best. They change mood within every minute. Sometimes they're covered in clouds, and other times they're not, and it looks as if they've just got some new coats of snow on it. Really good to see. That'll mean good moisture for the little creeks and the valleys below. The Steens Mountains change in mood from minute. We've decided to go to Willow Creek Hot. We arrive at Willow Creek Hot Springs and find that there was no one in the water, so we have it all to ourselves. The larger pool is the cooler pool, and the smaller is the hotter. We can see the volcanic gases wriggling their way to the surface of the rather clear water, and the temperature in it is just perfect for the day for a nice soak in Willow Creek Hot Springs. We climb up on the mountain right behind it and look down at the hot springs in our pickup. We can look over across at there's just a series of beaver ponds on Willow Creek, which is really close to the hot springs, and we can see ducks swimming in the beaver ponds. If it were later in the day, we'd probably see beaver out there going to and fro, carrying limbs and little trees and things that they can use for food. There's a beaver house right in the midst of the reeds, and a beaver dam with the water flowing over it. There's still a bit of ice on the pond from the cold weather of the night before. And the Pueblo Mountains are showing up, and that's the Nile Peak where that heavy bomber, the B-24, crashed during the heat of World War II, killing 11 people. We use the hot springs for a while, and then it's time to get back to our trailer house. The little ground squirrels are coming out, wondering where their peanut is. They sure are little peanut hounds. They are the little antelope ground squirrel, and that little guy got away with two at one time. Not very often they can get away with two, but he sure did it. They entertain us real well. Next, we decide to go down to Coyote Lake and check on it. At first, it looked like it was wet, but that was just the color of the playa. So we very cautiously drive out there after checking it first. We're going out and see if the moving rocks moved. And hey, the moving rocks look like they moved but good last winter. But wait a minute, that's not a moving rock. That's a big clump of horse manure, which apparently was froze solid. Then water flowed around it and froze it in the ice. And then the ice moved and it left a really nice long trail that's not necessarily in a straight line. We've got one on Death Valley. They may have moving rocks, but I'll bet they don't have moving horse manure like we do. Not only do we have moving horse manure that leads the trail, but here is a real rock that moved and left a really nice scraped trail as it wanders around across the cracked playa of Coyote Lake. Some places it makes a double mark, and other places just a real deep single mark. It moves up to a spot and then turns and goes various different directions. I guess it depends on where the wind's blowing from. And it looked like it sat there for a while, and then, well, it moved on and on and on and on it moved. Marge says anyone that's interested in those moving rocks is probably sick, so it looks to me like she must be sick. We went and found a piece of an old exploded World War II bomb. And then it's time to ward off the cold with a good hot breakfast, and our time is running out for being here, and we have time for one more hike, and that'll be it. Then we're going to have to start heading home after we have our good hot breakfast. And Marge hasn't put an opinion out, whether someone that looks at frozen horse manure that leaves a trail is sick as well. Maybe she'll tell me later. But meanwhile, we go out and find a den where it looks like probably a badger has dug him a den to have his babies in. And we can see all kinds of fresh tracks there. So it's active. There may even be baby badgers in it. So we better not pester them, and we'll go out one more time and look at a pile of frozen horse manure. We found lots of piles of horse manure that have moved and left a trail. Then we found trails that had nothing at the end of them. So that indicates the scrape marks are here. That indicates that it was just ice that was moving, broken up pieces of ice, and they made very distinct trails, and there were absolutely hundreds of them there. They move in a bunch of a variety of different directions, and there are some very good ones with no rock and no pile of horse manure at the end of them, one we'd follow clear to the very end. As I looked around, I saw a trail that was different than some of the others. It was much wider and fairly deep, with a pile of dirt along the side, so I just followed it on foot to find the end and hopefully find a big rock. For yard after yard I walk along a considerable distance. This one was really moving out, and across the cracks on the playa and on. I kept going. It looked like it paused for a moment there and then continued on. I'm anxious to see what kind of a big rock's at the end of it. In Death Valley, there's a problem. People steal those rocks that move across. And there are not that many rocks here on this playa like there are on the playa in Death Valley at the racetrack. But people steal them and take them home for souvenirs, and they're trying to get that stopped. But it's hard to watch people all the time for something like that. They should have better sense than to do that. I continue on, step after step, and there it is. But uh-oh, that's just another big gob of horse manure that's been frozen in the ice and moved out there. The weather looks as if it's getting ready to act up a little bit, and we're running out of time. So we're going to take one last look at the Steens Mountains and head for home. On the way over the little hill, we see quite a bunch of wild horses. The sun's shining by now, and they're laying down. It's not that often a horse lays down, usually only to sun themselves. They can even sleep standing up. And we see the old stallion. He's standing there, it looks like sleeping.